Hello everybody, my name is Rob Hopkins and it's a real honour to be able to sprinkle a bit of transition into your fantastic conference. I'm sorry not to be there in person. I try very hard not to fly as an organisation that models low carbon approaches. It feels really important to us that we try and also embody that. With all this great technology at our disposal, it feels really good to make use of that. So I wanted to start with this photograph which was taken just after Donald Trump's inauguration, when Greenpeace hung this banner behind the White House saying "resist" on it in big letters. I think for me the next few years will be really shaped by the need to resist, but also alongside that, and I apologise in advance for the atrocious Photoshop you're about to see, but I think we need to be adding two extra things to that as well. We need to be adding reimagine, and we need to be adding rebuild, and that's very much where I think what the work that you do and the work that transition groups do really hang together. You know, we need to be reimagining the world around us and then making it happen, and designing and creating the kind of world that is suitable for the future that we need to be moving into. So for me, those three things, resist, reimagine, rebuild, are really going to underpin the next few years. And so I wanted to start with this by telling you a story that you see here. This is in a street in Brussels. And the transition group here in this area, this is called 1000 Bruxelles, 1000 Brussels. And the transition group here, the people who live in this neighbourhood, live alongside prostitution and suffer many of the issues that communities who live alongside prostitution do. And this was a street where men would drive up and down every night. And the council, you just see in the corner of this picture, put 2 blocks of concrete to block the street to stop people driving up and down. The community, the people in the street, said, actually, we can do better than 2 blocks of concrete. And so they came together and they designed this small garden to go in the street. The local council gave them the money for the materials, and then people came out and they built this garden together. The point I'm showing you this for is I think very often when we think about climate change, about economics, we only value the big solutions. We value the big, really impressive things, and we imagine that people somehow magically leap from not knowing anything about climate change, about community development, to being really active and really involved in doing incredible projects. But I think it's really important that we always bear in mind the fact that we need steps in. People don't jump from A to Z, they need to get to C and then to be helped on to D, and then maybe they move to G. This garden was had an incredible impact on this street. It was the first time people had really worked together. It was a place where you would never normally stop, never stay still. Actually, now people meet in the street, children play in the street for the first time, tour guides bring their tour groups to come and see this. Other streets come and say, can we have one of those? When the refugee crisis hit in Brussels, the people on this street coordinated an incredible community-led response where in 2 weeks they built, using recycled materials, the facilities to feed 1,000 people 3 meals a day, all as volunteers. And when you say to them, where on earth did you get the confidence to think you could do that? They said, from this garden. So for me, there's a really important piece in how we reimagine our economies about starting with small things that invite people to be part of. And the reason we need to be doing all this, I'm sure I'm not going to dwell on this, I'm just going to, because I think this one image really captures it all. You know, there is a kind of a perfect storm of different things. You know, the impacts of business as usual are really becoming screamingly abundantly clear to everybody, maybe not to the current US administration, but certainly to the rest of the world, that the way that we're living is pushing everything to its absolute limits. And so we need to really redesign what we're doing, and that needs to happen with great urgency. So I spend a lot of my time meeting different transition groups and finding what they're doing and seeing what's going on the ground. So I'd like to share with you 7 things that I see happening which hopefully might inform the conversations that you're going to have over the next day or two. And they're things that you may have seen too, and some of them certainly are. But I think it's very easy these days, and then we seem to collectively be telling ourselves a story that the future is inevitably going to be dreadful, and actually for me I see lots of signs that that's really not the case. So the first one I call from anywhere to here, And the way that I like to talk about this is by talking about beer. I just think beer is a good way to engage people in these conversations. So here are two bottles of beer. One's a bottle of Budweiser, massive multinational company. Everywhere in the world where you taste a bottle of Budweiser, it tastes exactly the same. Not great. And Budweiser are a company that have thrown $15 million at lobbying for policy change in the US. Their business model is to become the only brewery in the world. The other bottle of beer is made by a small craft brewery in London called The Colonel. Massive explosion of craft brewing around the world. Now I think 9% of beer sold in the UK is produced in small, independent, local craft breweries. Huge explosion. These guys were recently interviewed on Radio 4 on a program called In Business, and the presenter said, "Tell us about your growth plans. What's your strategy for growth?" And the guy said, "We don't really have a strategy for growth, because if we grew, we'd have to work harder. And we kind of quite like it like it is. And we don't want to become the only brewer in London. We want to see an ecosystem of people all across London brewing the most fantastic beer." And we see in what they're talking about a different economy, a new economy, about diversity, about connection, about place, that place really, really matters. And so for me, this is a story that I like to tell, because I wonder whether we can make the shift from our current economy to the new economy, not because of big political lobbying against the current economy, but because the new economy is more delicious, and that once you've tried it, in the same way that once you've tried this, you would never go back and drink Budweiser ever again, whether we can look at moving to the new economy in that way. But I love this, and because actually what that Budweiser economy does is present us with this illusion of choice. We go in a supermarket and there's hundreds of different kinds of beers, but as this chart shows, actually they're all just made by 5 companies. When you move to this kind of craft brewing economy and you have all these different small businesses, then you have a real much more resilience and a real choice. And one of the ways that this idea of that local matters manifests in the transition movement is through local currencies, money you can only spend locally, designed to reflect the place, its culture and its history. This is the incredible £5 note the Brixton Pound made to celebrate their 5th birthday, for example. The second one is from divest to reinvest. Massive divestment movement at the moment about moving money away from fossil fuels. And then what do we do with it? The work that we need to do at our local level to stimulate new livelihoods, to stimulate new projects, new energy generation, that needs money coming in. So how can we move our money that is currently in the sort of the economy that we need to get away from and bring it into the economy we need to create? There's lots of different ways, whether it's through community energy projects, different investment opportunities. This photo here is of a thing we run here in Totnes called a local entrepreneur forum, which is a really fantastic event for bringing the community together, a kind of community supported enterprise where people come together, entrepreneurs present their ideas, and people then pitch the kind of support that they want to give them. Yeah, and the idea of the community coming together to support its new economy into being, and it's a model that could really happen anywhere. The third one is from someone should to let's. I think often we get stuck in this space of thinking, oh God, somebody should really do something about this. And we identify problems and we get stuck at just thinking somebody should do something and don't step across into doing something about it. This is in Fishguard, where the transition group found that there was masses of food being thrown away by local shops. And rather than saying, why doesn't someone do something about that? They started a cafe, a surplus food cafe, that gathers all that food together to produce affordable meals for families on low incomes, train local young people who want to go into the catering industry, and it's won a number of awards. It's a really, really fantastic project. They save 21 tons of food from landfill every year, but by stepping up. A lot of what we do in Transition Network is to give people the tools they need to make that step, so they can step up to starting a group with all the resources at their disposal to enable them to do that. The fourth one I call from niche to mainstream, which is that these ideas for many years have felt very niche and very strange. This idea that the local place matters, the local economy and its resilience matters, that the culture and community involvement and diversity matters, is growing very quickly. The photo here is from a new hospital that's about to be built in Birmingham, which is going to be the first one that I know of that really models this idea. So the idea is it will be built using 80% local materials. It will source local food. It will involve the local community. It sets out to return as much money as possible to the local economy rather than into the pockets of Serco and companies like this. This idea that we want money to circulate as many times as possible to have the maximum possible local benefit is really the idea of now, I think. And here in Transition Network, we did these local economic blueprints here, where we mapped 3 places, their local economy, and said, how much money do we spend on food every year, on energy, on care, and how can we get that money to cycle locally? Here in Totnes, for example, we found that we spend £30 million on food every year. 22 million of that leaves through just 2 supermarkets. But it means that we can now say, if we could make a 10% shift as communities, as individuals, as organisations, hospitals, schools, nursing homes, that's £2 million in our local economy. We did that. We didn't wait for permission to do that. We can do that right now, shape the new economy by how we invest, how we spend. And this is really an idea that is becoming a mainstream idea, I think. The 5th one is from theirs to ours, which I don't need to really tell you much about. This idea which the Development Trust Associations have modelled so powerfully and implemented around the country, that communities need to own assets, and it makes an enormous difference. The picture here is a project called Atmos Totnes, which is a project that we have been running here in Totnes, where the community has become its own developer on an old 8-acre milk factory site, which recently got planning permission using something called a community right to build order, where there was a community referendum which got an 85% yes vote to go ahead. But the important thing is it will be in community ownership, and it will change how the community is able to imagine its future, because it will have an income generating asset at its heart. The 6th one is called Come Join Us to How Can We Help, which I think is this move from saying assuming that we know what people need to working from what people's needs are. And again, the Atmos project I mentioned has really done that. The photo here is from Jamaica Plain in Boston, where the local transition group there are working with a local laundrette, a local dry cleaner, and working with them to help them change their practices. When the guy who runs the business was unsure, the 35 people who work for him, mostly low-paid immigrants, are exposed to all kinds of horrible dry cleaning chemicals. The transition group were able to help them to make that shift away by saying, here are 400 people who will support your business through that shift. The idea that we start with what our local needs are, again, is something which may not be new to those in the Development Trust Association, but it's something that we really try to roll out through transition groups. The last one I call from, so I've got them here and I can't remember them all, and they're very small, from clone towns to places of possibility. More and more our high streets, our housing developments, everything starts to look the same. And there's a real risk that actually long before climate change finishes us off, that actually we've all just expired through death from boredom. And so for me, there's something really important and really powerful about creating spaces where a new economy, another future feels possible. This is Crystal Palace in London, Transition Crystal Palace, who created the most fantastic food market. They went to the community and said, what kind of thing would you like us to create? The community gave them the principles to underpin it. And what they've created is a market that people come to, and as they walk around, they think, what this market needs is whatever. And there's now been 25 new businesses started up to fill spaces there as the thing goes from strength to strength. It's one of the things that feels so important to me, that we're able to imagine the possibilities of a different future from now. And we have to intentionally create the spaces where people can see and taste and smell, get a sense of what that might look like. One of the things they've done in Crystal Palace that I love is what they call a patchwork farm, that they've inspired over their 6 or 7 years as a group so many people to start growing food. They've started so many food growing projects in parks that they now have what they call a patchwork farm. When you look at them all spread out on a map, it's like a patchwork farm. So there's a stall at the market called the Patchwork Farm, and every Saturday morning somebody goes and they go around all the gardens and they harvest from each of them. And so the food that's for sale there, was grown in your neighbourhood that morning. And you know, when we look at cities from the sky, we can either look at them as being lots and lots of buildings, or we can look at them as being a massive garden with lots of buildings in between. And the idea of seeing our cities as patchwork farms, I think, is one of the lovely ways of giving people a different way of looking at possibilities. So I just want to finish on this picture that I took when I was in Denmark recently, which I thought was really entertaining. That here we have one path, which is a path created by experts, by the people that we elect, by the people who we assume know what they're doing, the people who are trained in how to design really great paths and have designed this path which makes perfect sense to them, and they've built this wonderful path. But of course, actually the rest of us are really good at creating our own paths, much better paths, paths that get us to where we need to get to much quicker, paths that we can walk together, paths that we can have better conversations when we're taking those paths. And actually my belief is that as time goes on and more of us walk these paths, they become the new paths, and that the ones that were built before, they have to change. It's what our planners call desire lines. You know, what we're doing, what the Development Trust movement are doing, what so many people now are doing is creating the desire lines for the future. And it's the most important and powerful work that we can be doing at this time. So I hope this has been a useful contribution to your conference. Thank you so much for the invitation. Enjoy the rest of your day. Keep in touch and take care. Thank you. Bye-bye.